And we will live with Gladys Quesada. She's at the summit of the G77 that is being held in Havana on September 15-16. She's now ready to bring us the latest updates. Hello, Gladys.
Hello, Adeneb. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, and I'm still here in the briefing room of the G77 and China Summit because this is the main venue for the information that generates this summit. In this occasion, I'm going to bring you the summary and the latest updates regarding the speakers and the heads of state that have addressed the summit and the attendees. In one of the main topics of the day, one of the main speakers of the day, the president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, was referring to imperialism and all the advances that imperialism and hostilities that has had towards Latin America and underdeveloped countries. Also, Daniel Ortega was referring to Cuba and the strength of its people and the will of its people to face the sanctions and to face over 60 years of blockade by the U.S. and other pressures exerted by the hegemonic powers and the Western powers. Also, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of Palestine, he was also referring to the burden of climate change and how the Global South is carrying the heaviest burden of this crisis and this phenomenon, and also how the neocolonialism is taking a grip in the world, but how the Global South can just fight back and not bend, just take a stand. And he was referring specifically to his people, the Palestinian people that has been facing the violence and the Zionist policies from the Israeli government and the Israeli settlers and colonialist people that is there. Also, he was saying that solidarity is the only way to conquer the future, and he was also referring that together, join as one, the Global South has the way to get to the future. Only united, the Global South can conquer the future. Also, Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina, one of the main figures, given his participation in the G20 summit and also in the BRICS summit. He is one of the main guests in this event, and he was referring to globalization and how globalization as a phenomenon, as a cultural phenomenon, is having a grip and having a stance regarding the Global South. And globalization is needed and mandatory, but the globalization of values, the globalization of cultures, the globalization of education, and the globalization of technology intended and put on the use of the peoples and the well-being of the underprivileged and of the humble people of the world. Also, he was referring to the aftermath of COVID-19 as one of the paramount turning point in the political and social global landscape, given the inequalities that the pandemic revealed. And also he said that the world must change, and the big pharma proved that the selfness of a few is taking a toll on the majorities. Also, in this occasion, he was referring to the inclusion in the G20 of the African Union, and he was referring to this as a reparation for Africa. He was talking about the importance of Africa, not only in the G77 summit plus China. He was also referring to Africa as the continent of the newness, the continent of a possible change, and a continent with great potential for progress. Also, in this case, he was saying that the inclusion of the CELAC is the last step for the real equality in the world balance of powers and the negotiations blocks. In this case, he was saying that CELAC must be rejoined or join the G20 and other organisms and bodies because the Caribbean is taking the toll of climate change and the climate crisis, the environmental crisis. Also, Alberto Fernandez said that the new war is not only a war of arms, it's a war of trade, a war of finance, and he was referring to the policies given or carried out by the IMF and the US that are weaponizing the dollar and using it against the smaller economies and the smaller countries. He was calling for the use of local currencies and how it could be an improving point for every economy, and also to gain sovereignty to gain independence. Also, Alberto Fernandez condemned the financial violence, condemned the sanctions against Cuba, the sanctions against other peoples and worlds and countries of the world. And he said that LATAM has a vast potential, not only in natural resources, as we know, Bolivia and Argentina now are one of the main strongholds of lithium extraction and production, but also he was referring to the potential to achieve independence in technology. He was saying that many of the people that want to success him in the presidency wants Argentina to be codependent of the US and other powers in matters of technology. And he was saying that no, that's not the answer. The answer is that Argentina generates its own technology, its own advancements, its own improvements in this matter, and to find their own solutions, and he was taking a stance in this case. He also condemned the sanctions of the US and the blockade of the US against Cuba, and he was emphatic that Cuba is one of the strongholds of the global South.
Environmental crisis. How have they addressed the environmental crisis?
Many of these governments, many, as I was saying, Ade, many of these governments, they took a moment in their speech, all of the heads of state and the prime ministers and the leaders, they were taking a moment to give their condolences and to show their sympathies with the people of Libya and the people of Morocco that have been hardest hit by flooding and by an earthquake last week. They also were saying that the global South is taking the grip, is taking the heaviest burden, and is being the most affected, the heaviest affected by climate change. But also they said the global North is the main accomplice, is the main guilt. It's the main producer of this change and must take the accountability of this. Also, they were saying that the global South, that comprehends the underdeveloped countries, must find a way to cope with the climate change and to cope with the aftermath of these phenomena and to find sustainable ways to coexist and to exploit the resources, but also to help nature and to save the planet. That's one of the premises of this: technology, innovation, culture, education, but to save the planet.
The summit.
Well, the summit is advancing, the summit is underway, and it is expected that other speakers continue to take the floor in the main halls of the Conventions Palace, but also they will have a protocolar lunch. It will be private, then the afternoon sessions, and in the end of this day, this first day of the summit, they will have a private and official dinner. It is expected to be at the 20 hours Cuba time. But you know, that's one of that's the schedule, that's the agenda, but they could extend the interventions and the moments taking the floor in this summit as they address one by one the summit and the attendees.
Thank you for the information. We'll wait for more news later on.